In a small town nestled between hills and fields, there lived a boy named Arlo. He had wild black hair, eyes that seemed to be searching for something, and a heart full of stories he never told anyone. But what Arlo was most known for, what followed him like a shadow, was his report cards. He failed, often, in every subject. It wasn't that Arlo didn't try. He did. At first, when he was in first grade, he sat in the front row, raised his hand, colored inside the lines, and smiled when the teacher called on him. But every time a test came, his mind turned blank. Letters danced across the page like mocking little ghosts. Numbers didn't add up. Instructions might as well have been written in a foreign language. Maybe he's just lazy, whispered some parents during PTA meetings. Maybe he needs glasses. Maybe he's not trying hard enough. And worst of all, maybe he's just not smart. Arlo heard them, not all at once, but in bits and pieces over the years. And slowly, a new identity wrapped around him like a second skin. The boy who fails. By fourth grade, he stopped trying to sit in the front. He found the corner seat, next to the window. He stopped raising his hand. He stopped bringing pencils. Why try when you're just going to fail anyway? At home, things weren't easier. His mother worked 2 jobs and came home too tired to ask about homework. His father had left years ago, and Arlo only had vague memories of a deep voice and a motorcycle engine in the driveway. His grandmother, who lived with him, believed school was only for doctors and lawyers, and Arlo, she said, wasn't going to be either. He believed her, but despite the weight pressing on his shoulders, Arlo had a secret. Every night, when the town grew quiet, Arlo pulled out a notebook from beneath his bed. It was tattered, filled with messy writing and sketches. Inside were pages of stories, his stories. Stories of dragons who couldn't breathe fire, of robots who failed their programming tests, of heroes who were told they'd never become anything, but who kept going anyway. He never showed them to anyone until 7th grade. That year, a new teacher arrived, Ms. Rivera. She was young, wore mismatched socks, and never carried a red pen. She gave the class an unusual assignment. Write a story about someone who doesn't fit in. Arlo didn't think twice. He wrote about a boy named Cal, who failed every class but could talk to animals. A boy who ran away into the woods, where he discovered he was the only one who could understand the language of trees and save the forest from destruction. Ms. Rivera read it twice, then a third time. The next day, she asked Arlo to stay after class. "This story," she said, holding the paper gently, "is incredible. You have a gift." Arlo blinked. "But I failed the grammar part." "I'm not talking about grammar. I'm talking about voice, heart, imagination. You see the world differently, and that's powerful." No one had ever said that to him before. From that day, something inside Arlo began to shift. Slowly. He still failed math. He still struggled with reading out loud. But now he stayed after school to write. Ms. Rivera brought him books, strange books with unusual characters, and encouraged him to enter a writing contest. He didn't win, but he entered again the next year, and the next, and one year, when he was 16, he won 3rd place in a national youth writing competition. The certificate didn't erase his other grades. He still barely passed his classes, but it was proof, real frame proof, that he wasn't a failure. After high school, Arlo didn't go to a big university. He worked in a bookstore, saved money, and wrote in the evenings. 5 years later, his first novel was published, The Forest of Cow. It didn't become a bestseller, but it reached kids who needed it, kids who felt like failures. And slowly, letters started arriving. "I didn't think anyone understood how I felt until I read your book. I fail all the time, too, but your story made me think maybe I'm not broken. Thank you." And Arlo understood something that had taken him years to learn. Failure doesn't define you. The world loves to measure success in numbers and scores and trophies. But sometimes real success is found in the courage to keep going, even when everyone says you can't. He never did become great at math, but he became great at something else, believing in the people the world gave up on, including himself. Years had passed since Arlo's first book hit the shelves. By now, he had published 2 more. Not blockbusters, not award winners, but stories that meant something. Quiet books, honest books, books that found their way into libraries, school reading lists, and late-night backpacks of kids who felt unseen. But Arlo still carried pieces of his old life with him. He still remembered what it felt like to sit at the back of the classroom, trying not to be noticed. He still flinched when he saw red ink. And even now, when he spoke at schools or workshops, he sometimes wondered if people could see, that he was once the boy who failed everything. One rainy afternoon, Arlo was at home editing the draft of his fourth novel when his phone buzzed. Email subject: "You probably don't remember me." It was from a name he hadn't heard in over a decade. Mrs. Callahan, his sixth grade math teacher. His stomach dropped. Out of all the teachers he had struggled with, Mrs. Callahan had been the toughest. Her voice still echoed in his head, sharply correcting, red penning, sighing when he didn't understand. But curiosity won. He opened it. "Dear Arlo, I just finished reading The Forest of Cow. My granddaughter brought it over last weekend and asked me to read it with her. I had no idea you were the author until I saw your name. I'll be honest, I sat still for a long time after I finished the last page. Arlo, I was your math teacher. I know I was hard on you. I know I didn't make things easy. Back then, I thought the way to help students was through pressure and high standards. But I've since realized I didn't understand what some of my students needed. You tried hard, and I never saw that. I just saw the grades. Reading your book was like hearing the voice of a student I never really knew. And I want to say something I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry, and I'm proud of you. Warmly, Mrs. Callahan." Arlo read the message 3 times. His throat tightened. For so long, he believed his teachers had forgotten him, or worse, only remembered him as a cautionary tale. But here was proof that people could change, that stories really could reach across time and soften hearts. He replied with a simple, honest message. "Thank you for your words. They mean more than you know. I wrote that book for the kid I was, and for all the others still sitting in the back of the classroom." That evening, he opened his old writing notebook, the one he used to keep under his bed. The pages were fragile now, full of forgotten scribbles and clumsy drawings. But the heart was still there. He realized there was another story waiting to be told. Not fantasy this time, not dragons or talking trees, but something real. A story about a boy who always failed, and a teacher who finally saw him. 1 year later, Arlo released his 5th book, The Back Row. It was raw, vulnerable, and written for kids who had stopped trying, for teachers who still had time to listen, for parents who didn't know what their children were carrying inside. It won awards, but more importantly, it started conversations. Districts added it to professional development programs for teachers. Students wrote letters. Former dropouts said they saw themselves in Arlo's story. And one day at a conference, a woman in a gray cardigan approached Arlo with tears in her eyes. "I teach 4th grade," she said, "and I have an Arlo in my class. I read The Back Row, and now I see him differently. I see him." That night, as Arlo walked alone under the city lights, he thought about how far he'd come, not just in miles, not in pages, but in becoming someone who turned failure into connection, pain into empathy, silence into story. And maybe that was his greatest success of all. Many years later, Arlo found himself standing in a room that looked nothing like the classrooms he used to sit in. There were no rows of desks, no chalkboards filled with confusing equations, no red pens. Instead, there were bean bags, a small round table, a shelf overflowing with books. Soft light spilled through the windows, and on one of the walls, someone had painted in bold, bright letters, "Every failure is a seed. Water it and watch what grows." This was the Back Row Center, a learning and mentoring space Arlo had opened in the very town where he once felt like the dumbest kid in the room. It wasn't a school. It wasn't a tutoring center. It was a place for kids who didn't fit the mold, for kids with messy handwriting and louder imaginations and voices, for those who failed their tests but aced empathy, creativity, and curiosity. Some came to write. Others came just to sit in silence and, asterisk, not be judged. On Friday afternoons, Arlo hosted an open mic where students could share anything they wanted. No pressure, no grading, just voices rising in their own time. One day, a nervous boy stepped up to the mic, clutching a crumpled paper in his hands. He began. I wrote something, but I'm not really a writer. I usually fail English, so it's probably not that good. From the back of the room, Arlo raised a hand. We don't say that here, he said gently. We're not here to be perfect. We're here to be heard. The boy nodded, eyes wide, and began to read. The words weren't polished. The grammar was off. But the story, raw and tender, left the room in silence when he finished. And then, applause. Later, as the kids packed up to leave, the boy lingered behind. Mr. Arlo, he asked, were you always good at writing? Arlo smiled. No, he said. I was the boy who always failed. The boy looked confused. But you run this place. You're an author. Exactly, Arlo said. That's why I run this place. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in warm gold and quiet lavender. And inside that small deskless room, more seeds were being planted. Because sometimes the ones who fall behind early are just learning how to grow in their own way, in their own time.